Mitchell Municipal Drain of October 22nd, 2024. My name is Briar Allison, Deputy Clerk, and I will be opening this meeting. I'd first like to welcome Councillor Banbury from the Township of Blandford Blenheim and Councillor Roman from the Township of North Dumfries, who have been appointed via resolution to this Court of Provision. With that said, I'm now going to proceed with the election of Chair. Are there any nominations for the role of Chair? Councillor Coleman? Do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I do.
Are there any other nominations? Councillor Pierce?
Move to close.
Thank you. So I'm looking at now to have another councillor appointed to the Court of Revision for the Mitchell Municipal Drain, as there's a section in the Drainage Act where the lands assessed for a drainage works extend from the initiating municipality into a neighboring municipality. The Court of Revision shall consist of 2 members appointed by the council of the initiating municipality, of whom shall be chair, and 1 member appointed by the council of each of the neighboring municipalities, and the court shall hear and rule on appeals as if the entire area affected by the drainage works were in one municipality. So that said, Councillor Garneau?
I'll nominate Councillor Coleman.
Councillor Coleman, do you accept?
Yeah.
Any other nominations? Seeing none. So I'm just looking for a motion to appoint Councillor Garneau as the chair and Councillor Coleman to the Court of Revision along with the other neighboring municipalities. Councillor Miller, Councillor Pierce, all those in favor? And that carries. And I will invite Councillor Garneau to carry on with the meeting.
Thank you, and I do also want to extend a welcome to our colleagues from neighboring municipalities. So for the benefit of those who are at the court for the first time, as the clerk said, we're doing things a little bit differently this evening because our neighboring municipalities are also part of the court. So that's why the fellow Brant councillors have been excused. So if I could get a motion to approve the agenda, please. Councillor Banbury, Councillor Coleman, any changes to the agenda? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interests from the court? All right, seeing none, we shall move along. I'll ask if there's anyone present in the audience who wishes to make an appeal at the meeting but hasn't submitted one in writing. Anyone attending? Doesn't appear there's anyone online. All right, then we'll be able to move beyond that. We have 2 items under communications. The first is the letter appointing Councillor Rolleman. Can I just get a motion to receive for information, please? Councillor Banbury, Councillor Coleman, any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries. All right, next, we have a presentation from the engineers, so we'll call upon them to give the presentation on the agenda. Sorry, do you want me to go through and split the presentation?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Terzian. I'm from Headway Engineering. I'm the project coordinator for the project. I served as a primary contact. I attended all the meetings and corresponded with many of the landowners as well. With me, I have Stephen Brickman. He's the project engineer. He authored the report, and he'll be with me today to assist or help out with any questions should we need to. I do have a PDF presentation, or presentation rather, that I'm going to go through. Initially, I'll discuss the assessments that is found in the drain report and talk about some general concepts of how we do our assessments before I address each individual appeal separately. So with that, I'll carry on. So the estimated project costs are $812,000 for the Mitchell Municipal Drain. They consist of all the items you see on the right-hand side, the allowances, the construction costs, our engineering for meetings, surveying, design, etc., preparation of the drain report, as well as environmental consultations, preparation of the contract documents, and supervision and inspection of construction, as well as contingencies and interest. The pie chart on the left breaks that down in terms of the percentage contributions each of those items make towards the 812,000, construction being the biggest at 66% of that cost. The assessment of costs for construction. This slide just shows basically the 5 pages of assessment that are found in the drain report. There are 4 drainage systems or drainage components that form part of this Mitchell municipal drain that are being assessed: main drain open, branch A, branch C, and branch D. The 2 yellow pages that are also found in the drain report, they're a combination of the previous 5 that combine all the assessments together and give you a summary of each individual's property assessment towards the main drain and the other branch A, C, and D, as well as the total combined assessment. You can see on the right was that image that I previously had up for 812,000 as a total project cost, and it's also on the bottom of the total assessment for the combined assessments page. The next slide is just a summary of the assessment of estimated costs per drainage system or drainage component. The green piece of the pie that I tried to shade in on the yellow page on the yellow sheets on the right represents the main drain. It's 58% of the $812,000, while branch A represents, and I'll say that the main drain is 471,400. Branch A being 129,000, which represents 16% of the total costs. Branches C and D are roughly equivalent at 13%, where branch C, the estimated cost is $108,600, and branch D would be $103,000. Some of the primary assessment principles: we basically base our assessments on the TAJA method, which is the provincially accepted kind of standard for determining assessment schedules and calculating assessments. 2 of the primary assessment principles that we follow are always assessing the property and not the landowner. And an example of that is, for example, if a property owner is not financially able to pay for their assessments, that's the kind of thing that we can't take into consideration when doing our assessments. We've got to focus on the property and how that contributes runoff and how that benefits the overall drainage system when we're doing our assessments. And also, assessments are not absolute calculations. They are relative to other properties within their respective watersheds. Our general method of assessments, kind of broken down into steps and items. First, we separate the project into logical intervals, assessing each individual interval independently from others. So in this case, we would have broken down the overall project into a main drain open component, a branch A component, a branch C, and a branch D component. Once those costs for each of those components have been determined, we separate the special benefit and the special assessment portions out of those total costs. The special benefit, for example, being, in this case, there are several new culverts installed on the drain. The landowner who's receiving the culverts will be assessed a special benefit, roughly about 50% of that cost. That's exclusive to them. They pay for that. So that's basically removed out of the overall total cost. The remainder costs of that culvert, or in this case, a group of those culverts, are assessed to the upstream landowners whose waters pass through those culverts. In the case of the special assessment, Brant County, in this case, is being especially assessed for a crossing through Nith Road. That's an exclusive assessment to Brant County that others aren't responsible for, so therefore that's removed from the cost as well. The remaining costs, once the special benefit and assessments are removed, is what gets split between a benefit portion and the outlet portion, then gets distributed amongst the rest of the users in the watershed. So that takes me to basically step 3, where we determine the split between the benefit and the outlet liability. And then that's based on the lands which make use of the drain at the time of the investigation. Step 4 and 5. Step 4, identifying the benefits and the benefiting lands. And step 5, distributing the benefit assessments relative to other benefiting lands. In the case of the 2 appeals today, neither of them were assessed benefit. They were assessed under the outlet assessments. So benefits not necessarily going to apply to the appeals, but that does form part of the process for the benefit, for distributing benefits. And number 6, we distribute the outlet liability assessment once we determine what that is relative to other lands using the adjusted areas method, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail following this. And then once we're done and once we've distributed the assessment to kind of the best of our knowledge and against our processes, we review it from many different perspectives. We also get multiple professionals to provide their opinions on what they think of the assessment schedule, and we seek out feedback from public and the others, and that more or less refers to when we have a public meeting and we provide the assessment schedules, the design, the breakdown of the costs. We'd like to get the feedback from the landowners and the property owners to see if they think anything's kind of out of whack at that point, and even following that before we prepare the final drain report. Moving along to the Drainage Act instruments of assessments, the Drainage Act provides engineers with tools to assess out those costs, and 4 of those main tools that we used in assessing out the cost for the Mitchell drain and its individual drain components are benefit under Section 22 of the Drainage Act, outlet liability under Section 23, special benefit, which I referred to earlier under Section 24, and special assessment under Section 26. Special benefit benefit was the biggest kind of tool, if you will, that was used, and about 372,000 was assessed out under benefit for the project, while about 38%, or in other words, about 310,000 or so was assessed under outlet liability, while 127,000 was assessed under special benefit. Mostly all of that would have been for the culverts. I believe the count is 10 culverts were proposed under this report, so the special benefit would mostly do with the design and installation of those culverts. The special assessment of 52,000, that's specific to Brant County, and the installation of a culvert through Nith Road. The pie on the left-hand side, the overall pie represents the 812,000 of the overall project costs. And like I referred to in my previous slide, where we take out the special assessment and special benefit component from the overall costs. So we separate those out, leaving the outlet and the benefit component. And those are the 2 kind of big components we distribute amongst everybody else after having isolated that from the special benefit and special assessments. Now, jumping into basically the appeals, so starting with the Hall property appeal, I have his written appeal on the right on the image. I won't read through all of that, but on the left side is the image of a watershed, and I've highlighted the Hall property just to give you an idea of where it is located in the watershed. It's basically located at the easternmost area of the watershed. It's on the east side of Ayr Road, and it's adjacent to Branch D. The line of Branch D is a yellow line. I don't know if you can tell from the screen. It kind of goes right up to the Hall property. Oops, I'll just go back. It goes up to the Hall property. So most of those lands drain through Branch D, or all of those lands drain through Branch D rather, and then enter the main drain about 2/3 of the way up. So basically the Hall property would be assessed towards Branch D as well as the main drain. The wording in the appeal focused more on the assessment towards Branch D, but I'll be going through the main drain assessment as well to just provide a complete picture of the assessment towards that property. So starting with the assessment to the Hall property on main drain open, as I alluded to before, there is the 4 tools. You can see it throughout that yellow kind of bar that I highlighted, the Hall property. The property wasn't assessed under benefit or under special benefit or special assessment. They're strictly assessed towards the outlet liability portion. And that number was $4,155 towards main drain open. Similarly, for Branch D, there was no assessment under benefit, special benefit, or special assessment towards the Hall property, just outlet liability, and that assessment was $14,071 towards outlet liability for Branch D. Combining the main drain assessment and the Branch D assessment, the yellow page, kind of right out of the drain report, provide a glimpse of the total assessments. So the total assessment for the Hall property towards the Mitchell Municipal Drain would be the main drain open component of $4,100.55, plus the Branch D component of $14,071, totaling $18,226. The basis of the assessment, as I mentioned, was mostly, or it's all on, based on the outlet liability portion, which is the assessment for outlet liability and injury liability provided for in subsections 1 and 2 of the Act shall be based upon the volume and rate of flow of water artificially caused to flow upon the injured land or road or into the drainage works from the lands and roads liable for such assessment. On the left side, I've highlighted the Hall property in yellow. So the blue line represents the watershed boundary and anything within that which is hatched in the yellow shading is within the Mitchell Municipal Drain watershed and will contribute towards Branch D as well as the main drain open. Moving on to how we calculated the outlet liability portion of their costs, we used the adjusted area method for outlet liability distribution, and the main factors in using that method are three main factors, which include the area within the watershed that they have, the surface characteristics of that area, and in many cases there are multiple uses or multiple land characteristics within one watershed boundary, and the last factor being the length factor, or the point of entry those lands make into the drainage system. Just going back to the surface characteristics, we use agricultural lands as our base and apply a factor of 1.0 to that. So that's kind of our benchmark, and every other type of land use is measured against agricultural lands. So in the case of built-up areas or asphalt areas, for example, who have increased runoff rates compared to agricultural lands, their factors are higher, as you can see, 5.0 and 8.0. In the case of woodlots or wetlands, if your property has woodlots or wetlands, those lands are reduced by 90% from the area that they have in the watershed due to the fact that they retain a lot more water than agricultural lands or impervious surfaces such as built-up areas or asphalt areas. So that basically means is if you had 1 acre of a woodlot or wetland in the watershed, that 1 acre is treated as 0.1 acres when doing the assessment. So it's reduced down 90%. To go over the specific calculation of how the outlet was calculated for the Hall property on the main drain, first of all, I'll just draw your attention to the top right of the slide, where I'll just break down the area that was assessed. So in total, within kind of the blue dash line that defines the watershed boundary, the area that we believe Hall has, where the Hall property is within the watershed, is about 24 hectares total. Of that, about 2.5 hectares is considered wetland, and wetland has a use factor of 0.1. About 4.5 hectares is woodlots, which also has a use factor of 0.1, and the remaining 17.6 hectares of this watershed area is considered ag lands. Or, sorry, about 17 hectares is considered ag lands with a use factor of 1. If you apply those use factors to those individual lands, that 24 hectares is otherwise treated effectively as about 17.5 hectares. And that's without applying the length factor, which is the third factor in the adjusted areas process. So calculating the actual adjusted area for the Hall property, it's basically the sum of the individual areas in the watershed for the Hall property times their entry points or length factors times their use factors. So in the case of the Hall property, where they enter the main drain is through Branch D. So all their waters pass through Branch D, then enter the main drain at station 2+041 out of a total main drain length of 3,042 meters. So basically, the Hall lands enter main drain about 2/3 the way up main drain. So that in its effect, its length factor is 0.67. So we take the individual land use areas and multiply them by the length factors, their respective land use factors, combine those numbers together to obtain the adjusted area for the Hall property. So in this case, when you go through that exercise, you've got a total adjusted area of 11.82 hectares from the original area that's in the watershed based on topography of 24 hectares. So it's been reduced by quite a bit using the adjusted areas method. To calculate the actual dollars and cents using the adjusted area, you basically do what I just explained for adjusted area for the Hall property to every property within the affected watershed. Once you calculate the adjusted area for each individual property, you sum those areas up to get a total adjusted area for that respective watershed. To find out Hall's or any other property's contribution towards that, you take their respective adjusted area, divide it by the total, and then multiply that fraction or that percentage by the cost that's been attributed to the outlet liability portion. In this case, it's $83,840 was assessed out through outlet liability. So 11.8 hectares divided by 497 hectares multiplied by the 83,000. Hall's property's contribution towards main drain open is $1,994. I just want to say that that does not include the outlet portion towards each individual culvert that the Hall property's waters will pass through on the main drain open, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides, because there is an outlet portion or an outlet liability portion for each individual culvert that those lands will pass through. For branch D, the outlet calculation is exactly the same as I just explained for main drain open. The affected area in the top right corner is still the same at 17.6 hectares. The only difference between branch D and main drain more or less is where his waters, or rather the property's waters, enter branch D. Branch D has an overall length of 1,173 meters, and we estimated that the Hall property enters branch D at station 850. So if you take that as the percentage of 850 out of 1,173, the Hall property uses about 0.72, or just a little over 2/3 of the length of branch D. Applying the land use factors I talked about previously to each individual land uses, and then multiplying those by their length factor, which happens to be all the same for the Hall properties, you get a total adjusted area of 12.76 hectares for the Hall property towards branch D from 24 hectares. So again, it's been reduced by roughly half once we factor in the length or the entry point and the use of that land. To calculate the actual dollars and cents from the for the Hall property from towards the outlet liability portion, again, you take his adjusted area, or the property's adjusted area, and divide it by the total adjusted area of branch D, which in this case is about 38 hectares, and times it by the outlet portion of that assessment at 28,200, you get a total of $9,496 towards branch D. And again, this does not include any outlet liability contributions towards new culverts. So turning your attention to the culverts and how the outlets are distributed for those, the outlet liability calculation towards new culverts is exactly the same. It's using the exact same process as I previously presented for main drain open and branch D. The calculations or the processes are the same. Hall property was assessed towards 4 new culverts on main drain and 2 new culverts along branch D. And the total liability, or total outlet liability for the project, will include the outlet liability of the Hall property for the other works on the main drain and branch D, as well as the outlet liability, or plus the outlet liability for each of the culverts that they're assessed towards. The chart underneath that description just goes through each of the culverts that the Hall property is assessed to. It itemizes the station of those culverts, the total estimated cost of those culverts, as well as the total outlet liability portion that's being assessed out to the upstream landowners for those culverts, which in most cases is about half. The entry point for the Hall's property through those culverts is just a straight 1.0, because your land either, or the waters either pass through the culverts or they don't. There is no length factor where you could say it's using 2/3 of the length or 1/3 of the length like you would in an open system. The waters are either passing or not, so the length factor is effectively set to 1. And the adjusted areas stay the same at 17.6 hectares. And each individual culvert has a total adjusted area as well. So once you apply the Hall adjusted area for each culvert to the total, and then multiply that fraction by the total outlet liability portion, in the last column on the right side, you'll see what the Hall property is contributing towards each culvert on the main drain open that the property is affected by. If you add up those numbers, the culvert contribution for main drain open for the Hall property is $2,161. Similarly on branch B, this time they only have 2 culverts that are affected. The contribution towards each of those culverts is $2,346 and $2,229 for a total culvert contribution on branch D of $4,500.75. The total outlet liability for the Hall property, once you add the culvert contributions and the other works contributions for the main drain, the culvert was $2,161, while the other works is $1,994, totaling the number that I had kind of highlighted earlier in the slideshow for $4,155. For branch D, the culvert contribution was $4,575, added to the other works of $9,496, and the total liability assessment for the Hall property is $14,071. Combining that with the main drain outlet liability, the total outlet liability or total assessment for the Hall property towards the project is $18,226. The net estimated expense for the Hall property, once you factor in the applicability of the government grant or any allowances for the property. In this case, there was a zero benefit assessment, so that item stays at zero, plus the outlet liability, which I stated was $18,226. The property it is rated as a farm tax class, so it is eligible for the 1/3 grant from the province. So once you deduct that 1/3 grant of $6,000 from the $1,826, you get $12,151, which is net out-of-pocket expense, or net estimated out-of-pocket expense, I should rather say, for the hauled property. They aren't entitled to any allowances, so that was staying at zero. And again, just that yellow sheet in the report that summarizes all the assessments, the $12,151 is stated. So moving on to the first point, in addressing that in the appeal, I'll just read that out. We have no culvert connecting our property to the land on the west side of Air Road.
Just to interrupt there, ask the clerk, should we pause and have the landowners present before the engineer responds?
Through the mayor, yeah. Sorry, not the mayor, the chair. Yeah, so if we can, maybe we'll just move on to hearing the appeals first, and then we'll have your response after, if that's all right.
So you want me to stop? Because I'm not necessarily done the whole appeal part yet. This is still a continuation of the whole appeal part.
Yeah, I think we want to hear from the appellants first, and then we're going to have you in response.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Should I stay up here?
We'll invite Mr. Hall up. So this is the first time we've had a presentation precede the appeals. So can I ask, is Chris Hall in attendance? Please. And if you just want to introduce yourself to the court and provide an overview of your appeal, please.
Good evening, my name's Chris Hall. I'm a 6th-generation farmer on the Hall farm. I do have some concerns with the water flow of our farm into the Mitchell Drain. As you can see on the maps, we do have a wetland that is really not marked on the diagram there of the water flow, which our water flow goes to that wetland from the bush and everything towards the bush. Even from the Air Road, our bush is lower than the Air Road. I don't know how water is going to flow uphill, but it just doesn't make sense to me how the water is, how we're getting the major use out of the main drain as much as we are. I did find a culvert. It is about 200 feet approximately down towards the next farm. It is wide open. I did check. Even with heavy rains this spring, I did check our ditches. I had very limited water going down our ditches towards this main drain, the culvert. The basic flow of my water was going back towards my wetland, my bush. And the wetland, the bush had water in it maybe 50% of the time. It is now currently dry. My bush does hold a lot of water. It is currently dry. So I just don't understand how the water flow is going towards this culvert from my land. Because what I see, and I've seen in the past, it generally goes towards my wetland and it sits in there.
Thank you. I'll ask, are there any members of the court who have questions for Mr. Hall? All right, seeing none, I'll just ask you to stand by. We'll have the engineer respond, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to make closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay. So just to address, the next few slides do address basically all of those concerns. So if you stick with me for the next few slides, I'll try to get through that. as he mentioned, there is a culvert to the north of his property. His property boundary, the R and road, the line basically goes through that. His property boundary basically goes through that line. To the north of that is his neighboring property. To the south of that is all of the Hall property. Just to give you an idea. So that white line is where we did find a culvert. So there's a crossing there. In his appeal, he is correct that there is no crossing adjacent directly to his property. So there is no way for the water to cross the road directly adjacent to the property, but there is a culvert. We measured about 25 meters north of his property line. Once the water we found crosses that road, it follows that white path that you see with the arrow and gets to branch D, which is that kind of dark line through that through the wetland. So there is that culvert is quite a bit lower than his lands, so water would tend to flow in that direction. Kind of moving on to the second point, which sort of addresses the same thing. The water in our wetland has no way to drain towards the Mitchell Drain, as it is the lowest point and contains water year-round. So I think he's talking about the wetland that's within the 7.04 hectares, which includes woodlot. So kind of what I said before, about 2.5 of that is wetland, but the other 4.5 are the woodlots. So going back to the adjusted areas, focusing on just the wetlands and the woodlot portion, we have reduced those. We have taken into account where those waters enter branch D. They don't enter the top end of branch D at 1,173, which would be adjacent to his property. They do enter branch D further downstream, which equates to an entry point of 0.72 when you factor in station 850 relative to the total. And that's both true for the wetland portion and the bush portion of his property. And then when you factor in the use factor for wood and wetlands at 0.1 for both and apply that to the wetland and the woodlot portion of his property, I'd just like to highlight that that 7 hectares was assessed effectively as half a hectare of land. So we've taken into account that the woodlot and the wetland do retain a lot of water, which is why they get reduced by 90% relative to agricultural lands. So that 7 hectares is otherwise treated as half a hectare in the calculation. And this is just an image from, I don't know how well you can see that. This is an image from Google Earth. It's a 2014 image. That blue kind of shaded area in the middle of the image, that's basically the pond, the wetland he's referring to next to the road on his property. Just north of that, where I have an arrow pointing at flow path, there's a dark line which represents basically a flow path that goes from the pond and flows north down the hill in towards that red culvert, or the culvert through the road. It might be a bit difficult to see, but the dark line does represent a flow path, and it's a lot clearer in photos taken in the winter like this, where you can see through the trees. You can also see a flow path on the downstream side of the culvert that comes along down through the snow and towards the woodlot. That's the flow path that eventually enters branch D at 850 rather than 1+173. I'll also note that at the information meeting that we did have, the assessment that we provided him, and which is likely the assessment that he based his calls on and his issues on, initially considered the water entering the top end of branch D, as we thought there was a culvert that crossed that point. But after his call and talking with him, we did investigate that. We did find the culvert crossing the road further downstream, so we did make that adjustment from the assessment that was presented at the information meeting to the assessment in the report. So the waters do enter further downstream on branch D rather than at the top end that we initially thought they did. And just referring to the last point, we wrongfully estimated the percentage of our land that drains into the Mitchell Drain, as we have a wetland on the east side of the proposed land border. I'm thinking that this wetland that's highlighted in kind of a light green shading outside of the watershed or south of the watershed, I'm thinking he's referring to that one. He could correct me if I'm wrong. The blue line that's dashed here, that represents the ridge or the watershed boundary. So lands on, in this case, the southeast side of that line would drain southeast towards another drain or towards that wetland, but anything on the northwest kind of part of that line would drain northerly and westerly towards that culvert ultimately, which crosses the road and gets into the branch D, roughly where that benchmark 8 note is on the drawing on the left. This is a kind of a heat map of the topography of the lands. The red or orange areas represent, I guess the redder the shading, the higher the elevation. The yellower, the greener the shading, the lower the elevation. You can see our ridge or our blue line goes along kind of the orange red areas of the watershed, indicating that it is generally across the ridge. Just to highlight that point a little bit better, here's the road culvert that we did find that he also referred to. This is just an alignment along a flow path from the road culvert up through the ridge, relating the profile on the bottom to the alignment on the top. You can see that at the entry point of the culvert, that's basically the lowest point of that alignment along that light blue line. The dip to the right is the pond that's on his property that he's saying water collects in and doesn't get out of. But the bottom of that pond is about half a meter higher than the invert of that the culvert going through the road. So although they're pretty close in elevation, the road is actually lower than the inside of that pond. The pond does have to build up and begin overflowing, but like that Google Earth image showed, there is a flow path once that pond does overflow, and the waters do head north towards that culvert and underneath the road. And the last kind of relation there is highlights the ridge. That's the ultimate ridge or the ultimate watershed break on his farm through that line. You can see it's the highest point along that alignment. So any waters to the right drain away from the Mitchell drain, and any waters kind of the northwest will flow towards that culvert and into the Mitchell drain. I don't know if you want me to stop here, but there is one last point in his appeal that I wanted to address regarding the contact information, and that'll be it for the Hall appeal from my end. Okay. The last thing I just wanted to address was the contact. I contacted Michael Terzi and myself of Headway Engineering on numerous occasions to have someone come and directly assess our land, but we're not able to connect with him. This is just a timeline of starting from when we had the public information meeting, when everybody in the watershed was invited to the meeting. It takes us through a few attempted calls. A couple of times we did connect, and up until the drain report was completed and filed on August 16th. Just to go into a little bit more detail on that. So on May 1st, we held a public information meeting for this.
Interrupt. I think we have the substance of the appeal on the land. So okay. With the court's permission, we'll take this part of it as written.
Okay.
So I'll ask, are there any members of the court that have questions for the engineer? All right. Seeing none, we'll carry on. Thank you. I'll just ask Mr. Hall if you had any closing comments you wanted to offer. Thank you.
The closing comment I'd like to make is over the years I've been on my farm, I have not seen water run down that ditch towards the culvert. Like I said, I'm 6 generations. I have not seen the water flow down that ditch. What I have seen, I've seen the water flow back into my property, back into my bush, where my bush holds the water into the wetland and in the bush. I just think the elevation maybe needs to be gone over a little more, and the flow of the water, I just don't see how it benefits me going towards the Mitchell drain. Water can't flow uphill, and I just like to see maybe another evaluation of the property. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll just ask you to stand by while we hear the next appeal. So you're welcome to have a seat. So next up, we have the Cleve property. Is Mr. Cleve with us this evening? All right, if you want to come on up, sir, and address the court, or we can let your written statement stand. All right. Okay, so we're going to proceed with the written statement, so we'll ask the engineer then to please respond on the Cleve property. Thank you.
So regarding the Cleve property appeal, I've highlighted his property, their property in yellow. They're in the southeast corner of the watershed, and their contribution towards the drainage systems are only towards the main drain open. They aren't assessed towards a branch A, C, or D, just main drain open, which is the green line. Their assessment towards main drain open is $2,742, and that consists only of outlet liability. So their total assessment towards the project is the same number, $2,742. And the basis of that assessment, I won't go through that again, is just basically using the outlet liability method, using the adjusted areas, same factoring methods. The calculations are exactly the same. In his case, once we work through the numbers, his adjusted area is 8.3 hectares, down from 28.3 hectares. And when you factor that with a total adjusted area for main drain open, his contribution towards main drain open is $1,393 without factoring in the contribution towards the culverts. In the case of the Cleve property, they are assessed towards one culvert on main drain open, and this chart just shows you that contribution is $1,349. When you add the $1,349 with the other works of $1,393, the total liability is $2,742. And the net expense after you deduct the government grant, which their property can get, their net out-of-pocket expense will be $1,828. And that's just highlighted in the assessment. And one of their points, sorry, I'm just having a tough time reading that. The southern portion of their area drains towards a pond on the south of the Mitchell Municipal Drain via tile and topography. So this is again a heat map that shows the topography of his lands, the red being higher elevations, the green being lower. So these are, I'm just going to show you a few alignments through some of the low runs to show you how we establish the ridge. So again, the left-hand side is the lowest point on that particular alignment. There is a ridge partway through the farm, but you can see it's about 2 feet lower than the ultimate ridge, which we're calling the ultimate watershed boundary, at least along that point. Another alignment where the low point is several meters lower than the ridge or the blue line that we've defined as the watershed boundary. And going on the other side of the watershed boundary, you can see any land or any waters that flow to the east of the boundary flow down into that woodlot. And this is just one more example of that, where the inside of the watershed boundary is quite a bit lower than the ridge and the area outside of it, clearly defining the high point. And just respect with the tile portion, when we ask people to come to the meetings, that's when usually people provide tile maps, so we could take into consideration any areas of their farms that are tiled in or tiled out of watersheds. When they come to public meetings, we encourage them to provide those to us so we could take those into considerations. We did have a public meeting, and I believe he did attend that public meeting on May 1st. We didn't receive any tile maps, and we didn't receive any communication outside of that meeting letting us know that a portion of his farm is tiled out. Otherwise, that's something we would have definitely taken into consideration. And I think the last part of his appeal that I just wanted to address were basically he had said there were lands on the east side of Air Road on his neighbor's properties that crossed through a culvert, which we didn't account for. He is correct. It is a culvert we did miss through Air Road. It's within that red dashed line that you see there. Originally, we had the watershed boundary kind of going. This is the watershed boundary as it's found in the report. It goes down the middle of the road. If we took into consideration that culvert originally, that would be the expanded watershed boundary. So you can see it would include the rest of Air Road and a portion of his neighbor's property. But we feel that culvert was there primarily to drain the road waters and ditch flow, not necessarily a lot of land from his neighbor's property. In our calculation, once we've taken that land into consideration, we found that there would have been an additional 0.76 hectares of land assessed to the county or to Air Road, and an addition or a new 0.46 hectares of land assessed to the neighbor across the road. In both cases, in the roads case, that would have resulted in about a $343 net assessment to the roads and about a $30 net assessment to the neighbor across the road. So about $373 of assessment that wouldn't have been on the other people of Main Drain, that would have been put on Air Road or the neighbor across the road.
you. Are there questions for the engineer? All right, seeing none, thank you. Mr. Cleve, did you want to speak or?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. When they had the first meeting, I guess because of being out of the watershed, I was not informed on that. So May 1st one was my first acknowledgement on anything or knowing what was going on. Not knowing previously that the encompass of our land and that in there, once we realized where the drainage part went, knew that numerous years we have increased the pond size and tiled 2 wetlands that considerably hold water all the time, that 50-50 whether we get a crop off it or not. The water will stay there. This year we had a 3-inch rain just before wheat harvest, and it was there for a month and a half. It cannot drain to the road. I'm not too concerned on the price. I just was more on my area being brought down. I came up with about 5 acres from across the road, and the region's road, or county road that comes through that culvert is considerable amount of water, to the point where I have to put bales out in the field to stop erosion during the wintertime. It is getting down to erodes the topsoil. So I work on that area, cover crop. Even with the hay field, the amount coming through that road from the neighbor is considerable, which it also goes back to the intersection at the corner from the 4 ways, the amount of water that comes down right through our property. So I just was more narrowing down. I expected more people appealing and was more concerned that the amount would be raised because of other appeals in other areas. So I understand water flows, we have to maintain it and where it goes. My next step will be get the ditch cleaned out, because mine goes down, it doesn't flow to the culvert, it goes out into a neighboring field that handles my water. So the next step will be the county to clean the drain out. Tile part though, we directed it all towards the bush. My rough guess is about 5 to 6 acres that we had directed the other way. And when the water lays there, it's about a 10-foot raise to go towards road. So there's no way that water flows that direction. It just stays still. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So in terms of next steps, the court is going to recess to the side room to discuss. You're welcome to remain in the room while we deliberate. If you do need washrooms, they're just through the door here. I'll try and give the clerk a 5 minutes heads up when we're ready to reconvene so that everybody can get back to their seats. But for now, for our visiting counselors, we're just going to go to a room just through those doors on the left.
Yes. No.
everyone to take their seats and we'll get the go-ahead there from staff. All right, thank you, everyone. So the court is back in session. We have deliberated on the two files ahead of us. Just in starting, I do want to thank everyone for coming today and participating. We as the court recognize that it takes a lot of courage to come forward and speak publicly about something. We also want to recognize that no one appreciates getting a bill, especially in tough times. So we know this is something that folks have to find a way to make work in their budget. We did want to also acknowledge to county staff as well as the engineers that when we're communicating with residents going forward and sending out those notices, if we could really make sure in plain language it clearly explains what the process is, what information you might want to bring forward, and why this is impactful, just to make sure that there really is that understanding, because what we heard today was that it wasn't clear at what point sometimes to participate in the process and what to convey. So we'll with that, we'll proceed to the two files. So we have the first appeal, that's Mr. Hall, lot 33 and 24, concession 6. So the court finds that the assessment on this property is to be reduced by $2,000, and the reduction is to be added on to the county of Brant, as the court believes that the Air Road should be assessed higher. And with regards to the second appeal, that was Mr. Cleve, lots 35, 36, concession 5. The court is dismissing this appeal, as we do find that the engineer accurately assessed the benefit to the property in his report. So with that, we will call the court to a close and thank Councillors Banbury and Rolliman for joining us today at the County of Brant. Thank you.